All right, sorry about that. Frustrating to record these videos sometimes, especially when you're in a hurry and this freezes up. So I just was going along with that last video and saw that everything had frozen. So shut it down. I'll edit that one and then I'll start the Hayakawa video separately, I guess. All right, so I'd already done about 3 minutes on this. All right, so Hayakawa, this one again. Language is Thought and Action. The chapter is chapter 2. It's on symbols. And whereas the Weinberg selection was about thought and trying to get clear on the distinctions between thought that goes in the pursuit of objective facts and thought that is making inferences or guesses. One is more certain, one is less certain, and more about probabilities. Now, in the Hayakawa chapter, it's more of a focus on language itself. So we're kind of out of our heads and we're thinking about how it is that language is sort of mediating between us and reality, right? And the first thing that Hayakawa wants to do is to clarify this distinction between signals and symbols. So when you think signals, think about your left turn signal when you're driving your car, your right turn signal, or the one that I often think about is probably the most common one is the Pavlov's dog, right? This idea that like as soon as you ring a bell, the dog starts salivating because the dog knows that it's time to eat. And the point there is that this signal has this real kind of automatic connection between the stimulus and the reception. So dog hears bell and then physiologically starts to salivate. We might have some of these in our lives in terms of like, the school bell at school. When kids hear that school bell, that last one, they're just like their mood changes and they get all excited and off they go. You don't have to think about it at all. It just creates this reaction. So signals have this kind of automatic connection between stimulus and receiver, and then the behavior is kind of prompted thereby. Whereas a symbol is different. Symbol stands for something, represents something. And there's a lot more like interpretive space between the symbol and the interpreter or the receiver. So, the color red can stand for all kinds of things. It can stand for emergency. It can stand for love on Valentine's Day. It can stand for violence and the color of blood. It can stand for all kinds of biblical imagery and all the rest, right? And so there's less of an automatic or necessary connection between the symbol and what it's pointing to. And that right there is the first important thing that Hayakawa wants to insist on. It's very similar to the distinction that Weinberg has just made between a fact and an inference. A signal is more kind of fact-based in the sense that it's this sort of clear causal connection between stimulus and response, whereas a symbol is more like inference-based, more interpretive, where there's much more kind of room to give or room to play between the symbol and the receiver of the symbol, right? We can disagree about symbols all the time, and we often do. The American flag, the eagle, there's a lot of stuff that we just sort of debate over. The point he's trying to make is that signals don't really admit that kind of level of debate. They're just more kind of automatic, right? And then he goes on this long kind of thing about, how we confuse symbols for the thing that they represent. And that's a very important part of our lives. He talks about clothes, he talks about furniture, he talks about food. And these things are packed, these symbols, the kind of brands we wear, the kind of grocery stores that we shop in, the kind of car we drive. These are all kind of symbols that they represent things. They signify certain things. And we get really worked up by all the meanings and significations and representations and all the stuff that they contain, right? But again, language as symbolism on 16, he wants to remind us that there are no necessary connections between symbols and what they symbolize, what they represent. And he talks about actors, the pitfalls of drama on page 17. He's talking about actors who are confused with the characters that they play. Think about it, right? What is an actor? An actor is literally someone who's making stuff up, who's like conjuring fictional performance based off of words on a page. these are made up situations. These are made up scenarios, but we get so kind of invested in some of these characters that we actually confuse the actor doing the fictional performance with the thing itself, with the person or that they're playing. Some of his examples are a little old at this point, but I was remembering, and this example's a little old too, but I remember a number of years ago, Bradley Cooper, he did that Sniper movie, American Sniper, and, you know, Republicans love any kind of war movie that like celebrates American heroes, right? And this is a Clint Eastwood movie, and I think it was Clint Eastwood, and it was a very like, not uncritical, but a pretty flattering portrait of an American hero, military hero who was killed tragically. And so Bradley Cooper plays this character who is beloved by many real world audiences who kind of lean conservative Republican, such that I remember Bradley Cooper, the human being, the actor, was at some kind of a Democratic function, and he was just sitting in the audience. And I remember the conservative Republican media just like was so pissed off. So many conservatives out there who thought, well, this is our guy. He's the American sniper, the soldier. And they were pissed off that Bradley Cooper would go to this Democratic thing because the character in the movie certainly wouldn't. He wasn't a hero to aspire to. So again, confusing the actor, who's basically a professional liar, with the thing itself. This is the kind of thing that the general semanticists get easily worked up about. Like, that's not real. You got to understand the difference between the representation and the real thing, right? Bradley Cooper is not an actual military sniper with all of these kills who helped save our troops in the field. He's a guy who's portraying that other guy. But we get these things confused a lot. All right. On 18, he goes through all the different kind of symbolic like sources of influence that we're surrounded by. He says, we live in an environment, this is second last paragraph, live in an environment shaped and largely created by hitherto unparalleled semantic influences. Mass circulation newspapers, magazines, radio, television. Obviously, this was written before the internet and the kind of that immersive world that we live in. And this matrix of meaning and influence and all the rest of it is a lot more thick and clouded and crowded than it was when he was writing. So it's even more true. So then he finishes off with this, map territory thing, which we're going to get tired of pretty quickly. But there's a further distinction that he makes in here that's worth looking at, and that is between the verbal and the extensional world. So let's just finish off by looking at that. He says at the last paragraph, actually a few lines before that, it is through reports then, and through reports of reports, that we receive most knowledge about government, about what is happening in the Middle East, about what movie is showing at the nearest theater, right? So lots of crazy stories coming out of Afghanistan right now. None of us is in Afghanistan right now, I think. And I would assume that probably zero of us have ever actually been to Afghanistan. Maybe one of us has been there or been through it, but I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. So what do we actually know about Afghanistan? And even if we went to Afghanistan, and if we lived there for like a year, would we still know it? I lived in China for 6 months back in 2011, and I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. How well do you know your own country? How well do you know your own city? You live here. How well do you know your own neighborhood, right? So the general semanticists are really worked up by like actual true knowledge versus partial, limited knowledge. So the verbal world is the world that comes to us through reports, through news stories, through videos at this point, a lot of videos or memes or TikToks or whatever. Even me on this screen right now, it's a report, right? And I'm reporting on a book, which is a report on reality and all other kinds of reports. Reports. Everything gets remediated and refracted and circulated, right? And they want us to be very sensitive to the fact that means that it's always a kind of a telephone game, right? So it's always someone picking up on someone, picking up on someone, picking up on someone. How well do we actually know the real world situation that we are supposedly learning about and talking about? So that's the verbal world, the mediated world of language, images, stories, reports, books, screens. It's discourse, the discursive mediated world. Then there's the extensional world. The extensional world is just that kind of world outside us that we encounter through our kind of direct experience. When we go on a walk, when we take a trip, we're riding in a cab, we're going through downtown New Delhi. We're actually walking through a marketplace, and we are encountering things with our senses, with our eyes and ears, and we're talking to people directly. We're going on a safari, right? And we are, I don't know, maybe we're just noting everything we can. We're just getting around as much as possible. Direct experience, right? That's the extensional world. So again, another distinction. The verbal world is a world of reports. It's a world of partiality. It's a world of human fallibility and error. It's a world of inference making. And then there's the extensional world, which we can experience directly, never perfectly, but directly. And obviously the general semanticists would want to privilege that, without acknowledging that one's personal direct experience doesn't necessarily equal the truth, but it is an unvarnished, unmediated, reported kind of encounter, and it's therefore sort of receives higher privilege amongst the general semanticists. So yeah, so the map is part of the verbal world. A map is verbal. It's saying these symbols point to those houses and roads and mountains and so on, right? But they're not the same. It's not one-to-one. These are pictures and representations of that external world. You guys have probably had the experience of using your, whatever your favorite Google map or Apple Maps or Waze or whatever you use to get around. You've probably had the experience of like it not being updated and it's sending you into a place that no longer exists, or maybe it thinks a road has ended because there was construction, but now the road has been built and it's open and doesn't know that, right? And so that map is not actually adequately representing the territory, and it's kind of messing you up because you don't have the ability to kind of figure it out necessarily. So there you go, gang. It's not terribly rocket sciencey type stuff. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy. The general semanticists are serious men, and so they're looking for ways of getting clearer, more distinct, more discrete, thinking about ways of clarifying our thoughts, the difference between facts and inferences, thinking about ways of clarifying our language, the difference between signals and symbols. Always want to be more mindful of the squishy probabilistic stuff where there's more area for interpretation versus that more direct causal kind of link to direct experience. So there you see the efforts and the aspirations to achieve greater levels of certainty, greater levels of clarity, greater levels of understanding, and especially understanding the limitations of our ability to understand, right? So like language is very limited. The verbal world is very mixed and partial and human and subjective. And so it's all like, be careful, be careful, be careful. This is not an accurate reflection. That's not an accurate reflection. Be very mindful. So there's a lot of like this that's happening in these general semantics texts, right? Like be careful, be disciplined. Don't confuse the symbol for the signal. Don't confuse the fact for the inference and so on. Be careful. All right, sorry about that little hiccup there midway, but you get 2 videos for 2 readings, and it's going to take me a minute to upload, but that's happening next, and I will see you very soon. Cheers, gang.